Fellow Disciples by Victor Yup and Doris Monk. Chapter 14. Perfect Example. John chapter 13, verses 1 to 17. One day a man received word he had just been appointed a mandarin, or public official. He was so excited he could barely contain himself. "I will be a great man now," he told his friend. "I must have a new robe made immediately, one that does justice to my new station in life." "I know the perfect tailor for you," his friend replied. "He is an old, wise man who knows how to give every customer the perfect fit. Let me give you his address." So the new mandarin went to the tailor, who carefully took his measurements. After he had put away his tape measure, the old man said, "There is one more piece of information I need to know. Tell me, sir, how long have you been a mandarin?" "Why, what does that have to do with the fit of my robe?" his client asked in surprise. "Ah, I can't make the robe without knowing that, sir. You see, a newly appointed mandarin is so impressed with his office, he holds his head high in the air, tilts his nose up, and sticks his chest out. So I must make the front of his robe longer than the back." A few years later, when he is busy with his work and level-headed from the stings of experience, and looks straight ahead to see what is coming and what must be done next, then I cut the robe so the front and the back are the same length. And later, after he is stopped by old age and so many years of weary service, not to mention the humility learned from a lifetime of endeavor, then I must cut the robe so the back is longer than the front. Therefore, sir, I must know your seniority if I am to fit you properly. Foot washing is a prominent practice in the New Testament church. Paul admonished widows to focus on good deeds, such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, and washing the feet of the saints. 1 Timothy 5:10. According to the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, foot, the dusty roads of Palestine and the Eastern tradition of removing shoes before entering a house make foot washing a necessary, healthy, and polite social custom and behavior. Abraham had supplied water to 3 strangers who had come to announce Sarah's motherhood and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis 18:4. On the day before Jesus' arrest, he washed the disciples' feet to provide them an example so that they would humble themselves like him and serve one another in love. Why is humility a gain and not a loss, a strength and not a weakness, an advantage and not a disadvantage? First, humility is perfected in love. John chapter 13, verses 1 to 5. It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Cleaning the body a few times a day was not uncommon in the East, especially in Asia. In contrast, most people in the United States usually shower once a day on a good day. Growing up in tropical Asia, I took a bath, not shower, twice a day because of the humid conditions and stifling heat there, and sometimes more on a sizzling day. The moment you retreat into the house to escape the scorching sun, you want to turn on the fan and air conditioning unit, if you are fortunate enough to have one, and hit the showers once the body cooled down. Before too long after the bath, sweat would start breaking out, trickling down your head, making your neck sticky, hands clammy, and mood sultry. I perfected the shower once a day when I visited Hong Kong in 2006 by taking a shower at the end of the day. Most houses in Asia then did not have air conditioning, so the running fan made residents thankful, but it also induced sleep. The mall is an option, but walking there in the heat is not. I used to wipe my face, hands, and body, but not the limbs, with a towel a few times a day. After use, the towel had to be washed or rinsed. If not, the towel would turn smelly, rot quickly, or change color. Can you imagine not taking a shower coming in from the baking Palestine outdoors? Or washing up before a meal when dinner was served? Or at least have your feet washed? The foot, true to its location in the body, lies at the bottom, the lowest, or the end. Foot washing was the lowest of all household tasks. People had no shoes, socks, or stockings in those days, so they wore mostly sandals or thongs. It was inappropriate, unreasonable, and even outrageous to expect a host to wash the feet of guests, so this menial task is left not to the loyal servant, but to the lowliest servants. In the absence of a servant, a host provides water for guests wandering the dusty outdoor roads to help themselves before stepping into the house. The last thing a servant wanted to do was to wash feet, and the worst thing to endure is to be labeled a foot washer. At least, the master of the house would receive remarks or compliments such as, "Thank you, you shouldn't have," or "I'll help myself," for his service, but a servant would get no respect or appreciation. The lowly servant would not hear words such as, "What a skillful pair of hands," "Hallelujah, praise the Lord," or "How may I pay or repay you?" No tips, greetings, or hugs. You can only hope that the guest was not a distant traveler, a frequent visitor, or have long toenails. On this occasion, Jesus was not the host or servant, and neither were the disciples. Since the owner of the upper room was unidentified, someone had to do the job. Jesus got up while others were reclining comfortably on the floor. He took off his outer clothing, verse 4, so that his robe might not get dirty, wet, or loose. A basin, verse 5, was necessary to transfer water from a bigger water jar to hold dripping water and to rinse the towel. Note that it is impossible to wash another person's feet standing and not kneeling. Foot washing was a dirty, unskilled, and thankless job, but it was an exercise of love, verse 1, not labor. In love, Jesus made it a choice and not a chore, a ministry and not a mandate, a privilege and not a position. Love makes a sour task sweet, a thankless job possible, and the detestable doable. Jesus washed feet out of love, not for a social experiment or a succession test. The emphasis of the text and from the introduction for this last act was his leave from the world and his love for the disciples. Verse 1. Second, humility is possible within limits. John chapter 13, verses 6 to 11. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "A person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you. for he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. A friend sent me a hilarious email I am sure busy workers identify with. Do the work. I'm tired. For a couple of years I've been blaming it on iron poor blood, lack of vitamins, dieting, and a dozen other maladies. But now I found out it ain't that. I'm tired because I'm overworked. The population of this country is 237 million. 104 million are retired. That leaves 133 million to do the work. There are 85 million in school, which leaves 48 million to do the work. Of this, there are 29 million employed by the federal government. This leaves 19 million to do the work. 4 million are in the armed forces, which leaves 15 million to do the work. Take from the total the 14,800,000 people who work for state and city government, and that leaves 200,000 to do the work. There are 188,000 in hospitals, so that leaves 12,000 to do the work. Now, there are 11,998 people in prisons. That leaves just 2 people to do the work, you and me. And you're sitting there reading this. No wonder I'm tired. I'm the only one working. John E. Hunter said, God did not save you to be a sensation. He saved you to be a servant. The reaction of Peter was understandable. He was caught between sitting comfortably and looking bad, letting Jesus do all the work. For most people, passively allowing others to wash their feet is far more difficult than washing the feet of another. A participant, Lawrence, in a foot washing experience conducted once in our church, shared that he sat uncomfortably in his chair and consciously avoided eye contact with the one who was washing his feet. And when he had an opportunity to wash the feet of another, he eagerly exchanged his idle role for an involved role. Peter squirmed as Jesus washed the feet of the disciples one by one, and wished that Jesus would stop after the second or third disciple. After all, they would have got the point by then. And when his turn came, Peter asked a lame question, objected weakly, but did nothing. Did Peter empathize with what Jesus did? Sympathize, yes. Empathize, not really. Though Peter had no desire to be on the receiving end, he had no interest to wash feet either. His meek protests surfaced because he did not want to look bad, feel uneasy, and say nothing. He wanted to appear unselfish, caring, and thoughtful. If he had felt that badly for Jesus or that ashamed about himself or the situation, he certainly did nothing about it. He did not take over the task, split the chore, or offer to help. He probably thought that his objection would shame others to act, that his withdrawal would mean washing one less pair of legs, and that, by declining Jesus' service, he would have no obligation to others. If no service and self-service were not options, Peter then picked Jesus' full-service wash. Peter had the greed of an elephant gobbling snake, as the Chinese would say. Of course, Jesus did not mean for foot washing to be a tradition, a sacrament, or a custom, unlike some denominations' understanding. It is about servanthood, not salvation or sanctification, because Jesus washed all feet, including the unsaved Judas. Jesus corrected Simon Peter. A person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean, and you are clean. Peter would later understand the deeper spiritual meaning and symbolism behind Jesus' action, that it was not about one foot or both feet washed, the number of people that benefited, and the duration spent doing the washing. For the record, Humility is in the attitude, not the action, lest some people mistake humility for humiliation and service for servitude. Third, humility is the priority of leaders. John chapter 13, verses 12 to 17. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." In the old movie Camelot, England's popular ruler, the legendary King Arthur, after bringing peace to the land, had a grand vision to call together the bravest and noblest knights from all over Europe to join him in his quest to right wrongs, battle evil, uphold peace, and dispense justice. Of course, knights, by nature, were combative, and confrontational warriors. The likelihood of the knights splitting into factions, battling one another, vying for King Arthur's favor, and jostling to be the king's right-hand man were real. So the queen asked King Arthur what plan he had to prevent the knights from fighting among themselves and struggling for superiority, creating dissension and chaos instead of bringing peace and stability. King Arthur's reply was that he would call the Knights of the Round Table, for the 24 most superior knights in his service would not sit around a typical triangular, rectangular, pyramid, or square table, but in a circle so that they would see one another as equal and not superior, and none would occupy a more exalted seat than the other. The only imperative in the passage is in verse 12. Understand. Jesus later explained that he gave them an example as their master and Lord. The title, Lord, occurs 5 times in the passage, verses 6, 9, 13, 14, and 16. The reason for Jesus' foot washing was to give or impart an example or exhibit, nothing else and nothing permanent. An example can be an illustration or for imitation. The first is the principle, but the second is for practice. The heart is more important than the habit, because the habit is too confined, conspicuous, and contrived. If you change the heart, you will change the behavior, because changing only one's behavior won't change one's being. Humility is designed for and expected of all, especially leaders, even as Lord Jesus did. Jesus said, "You also should wash one another's feet," verse 14, "and you should do as I have done for you," verse 15. Though Jesus was the one who washed the disciples' feet, he did not mean for anyone, including Peter, to do the job by himself. He did not name names, tag one disciple, or appoint a few for life to do the work. No, they were to take turns, pick a disciple or wash the feet to the right, left, or across the room. All were participants. All were expected or included. There was none so superior, beautiful, noble, clean, or holy that they cannot stoop down to wash another's feet. This was to counter the Zebedee brothers' request and the disciples' dispute in previous chapters. Peter, James, and John were in Jesus' inner circle, but they were not in Jesus' preferred leadership. Jesus had uttered this Greek word for blessed, verse 17, 30 times in his sayings, but with a twist here. Jesus usually said blessed, or blessed is, or blessed are. But in this only instance, he added, blessed are you if. All other utterances, especially from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-11, usually stated who was blessed. But the emphasis in this passage was how you can be blessed. Normally, blessedness was a state of being, a condition, or an attitude of the heart, an outcome, or an existence. We were not told how to arrive at the state of blessedness. The steps were not specific, clear, or given. However, one way of blessedness is guaranteed. The provision of if means that God's a blessing is a promise to those who humble ourselves and serve one another and follow Jesus' example. Conclusion. Jesus knowingly washed the disciples' feet when the time had arrived for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Jesus was conscious of Judas' betrayal and his pending departure. However, foot washing was not merely Jesus' last act, but his enduring attitude and only example. This specific word for example in Greek, John 13:15, is the only known occurrence in the Gospels, the only example he has left for us to follow. Humility is not an enjoyable thing, but an acquired taste. Do you serve only when someone asks or when it feels good? Are you afraid of being perceived as a waiter, an attendant, or an employee, rather than a faithful servant in the service of the Father? Humility is not an art, a competition, or a fashion. It is not a show, a stunt, or a skill. Jesus does not care what knowledge you have on occupational therapy, how sensitive you are to the guest, how fast or clean you are, or how many you can wash. It is an attitude, not an activity. Humility is not a law, but a lesson, a necessary and basic and essential one. It has its limits and not for leverage. If Jesus, our teacher, Lord and Master, who had come from God and had all things under his feet, came humbly as a servant, who are we to be proud, act arrogantly, or think highly of ourselves? Since Jesus has set us an example, are you following and learning actively, serving him faithfully in love? Bible study questions. 1. Try to describe the background to Jesus' act of washing the feet of his disciples. Verses 1-3. 2. Try to describe Jesus' actions. Verses 4-5. 3. How did Peter feel about Jesus washing his feet? Why did he not want Jesus to wash his feet? Verses 6-9. 4. What did Jesus have to teach Peter? Verses 6-9. 5. What did Jesus have to teach about being clean? Verses 10-11, 5:11, Matthew 5:8, John 15:3. 6. What clear teaching did Jesus have on foot washing? Verses 13-17. What is Jesus' example? 7. Discuss. 1. How did the disciples feel when Jesus washed their feet? If Jesus were to wash your feet today, how would you react? 2. What does it mean to wash another's feet? Is it in serving one another, forgiving one another, helping each other in the Lord, or other matters that we are cleansed? 3. What meaning did Jesus' act of washing the disciples' feet have for Judas, who was about to betray him? Why? Can he be cleansed? Why? 4. How can our small group or fellowship practice this saying? If you know these things, happy are ye if you do them. Application. Personal devotional reflections. 1. If the Lord were to wash your feet today, how would you respond? 2. If the Lord were to command you to wash the feet of another, who would it be? Why? 3. If you know these things, happy are ye if you do them. How do I practice this teaching? After each study, always encourage members to share one lesson learned about being Jesus' disciple or one act to practice as his disciple.